I'm a 68-year-old mother who placed all my trust in my son-in-law after my daughter was taken by the COVID-19 pandemic. That night, he beat me, dragged me out into the rain, and roared, "Why don't you just die and get it over with?" What he didn't know was that my genius daughter had left behind a truth, carefully sealed, and it was just about to be opened. Do you ever look at an old photograph and feel like you can still hear the laughter? I have one like that, of my daughter, Clara. It was taken on Christmas morning when she was 10, her eyes bright with that pure, uncomplicated joy only a child has. "Hello, my name is Bethany. Thank you for being here with me today. If you're listening, I'd love it if you'd like this story and maybe leave a comment telling me what city you're in. It's a nice feeling, knowing we're sharing this moment together." The story I'm about to tell you begins after the laughter in that photograph went silent for good. The COVID-19 pandemic took her from me, and it left a quiet so deep I thought it would swallow me whole. It was all so fast and cold and cruel, like a winter storm in the middle of summer. There were hospitals, glitchy video calls, and then nothing. It was just me and my son-in-law, Rick, two people adrift in the same sea of grief. At least, that's what I believed at the time. My little house in the suburbs of North Carolina was never grand, but every corner of it held a piece of Clara. The porch step where she sit and read for hours, the kitchen that always seemed to smell faintly of the apple pie she loved, and the small garden out back. That garden was our special place. It's where we planted our first rose bushes together, our hands covered in soil. After the funeral, that's where I spent most of my time. I'd pull weeds, prune the branches, my hands moving on their own. When my hands were busy, my mind couldn't scream so loud. I could feel her presence there in the scent of damp earth and the deep red of the petals. It was my last sanctuary, the only safe space I had left. That house wasn't just bricks and mortar. It was the heartbeat of my family. It was everything I had left of my life, and I thought I'd live there until my last day. Rick started visiting more often after the funeral. He always seemed to show up in the late afternoon, just as the sun was getting low and the loneliness started to feel heavy in the air. He wouldn't say much at first. He'd just sit there in my late husband's old armchair and let out these long, weary sighs. One evening, he sat next to me on the porch swing and took my hand. His was cold and a little damp. He started to cry, not loudly, but with these choked, quiet sobs. He told me how lost he felt, how I was the only family he had left in the world. He talked about how Clara would have wanted us to lean on each other, to get through this together. There's something about a man's tears that feels disarming, and a mother's heart, already shattered by loss, is a soft thing. I looked at him, and for a moment, I didn't see a near stranger. I saw a piece of my daughter's memory, a living connection to her. I patted his hand, a simple gesture of comfort, a gesture I would come to pay for dearly. A few weeks later, Rick made his proposal. He came to me with this earnest look on his face. He told me that being alone in the house would only deepen my sorrow, that every room was a painful reminder. "Why don't you sell it, Mom?" he'd said, his voice so gentle. "Leave the heavy past behind and come live with me. My house is bigger, and I can take care of you. We'll get through this together." He painted such a warm picture. Dinners together, watching TV in the evenings, a small two-person family looking out for one another. It sounded so logical. I was 68, living on a modest pension, and my deepest fear was becoming a burden. The idea of having someone to look after me, of not being completely alone, was a powerful lure. He promised he'd handle all the paperwork, that I wouldn't have to worry about a thing. All I had to do was trust him, and in my exhaustion and grief, I nodded. Packing up the house felt like slowly dismantling my own life. Every object I touched was a story. The tea set my own mother had left me, my husband's worn out collection of books, and the hardest part, Clara's boxes. I found her elementary school essays, the handmade cards she'd given me every birthday, her first prom dress. I just sank to the floor in the middle of the room, clutching that silky fabric to my chest, and cried without making a sound. Rick helped me pack. He was efficient, but there was a strange hurry to him. When I hesitated over the old armchair, he said it was too bulky for the move. When I wanted to bring my vinyl record collection, he told me it was outdated. He gently convinced me to keep only the bare essentials. In the end, my entire life was reduced to 3 suitcases and a few cardboard boxes. The day we left, I took one last look at the house. The sold sign hammered into the front lawn felt like a wound. Inside, the rooms were empty and cold, and my footsteps echoed in a way that felt wrong. I handed the keys to the realtor, my heart like a stone in my chest. Rick drove. He was unusually cheerful, whistling along to some song on the radio. I sat in the passenger seat, watching the familiar streets of my neighborhood disappear behind us. A vague sense of unease began to creep in, that little nagging feeling you get when you think you've left the door unlocked, but you can't be sure. I pushed it down, telling myself this was a new chapter. He mentioned the money from the sale would go into a joint account to make it easier to manage expenses and your health care down the line. I didn't ask any more questions. I chose to trust him. That was the first mistake. Rick's house was in a newer part of the city, modern but soulless. The room he'd set aside for me was at the end of a hall. It was small and a little dark, with a window that looked directly onto the brick wall of the neighbor's house. It was clean, but it was sterile. There wasn't a single family photo on the walls. As I opened my suitcase and placed my few personal items on the nightstand, the photo of Clara, my old Bible, they looked foreign, out of place. I couldn't sleep that first night. The noise from the street outside was unfamiliar, the mattress felt strange, and the silence inside the house was unnerving. I lay there, listening to the sounds of Rick pacing in the living room, the TV turning on and off, the refrigerator door opening and closing, and I realized, for the first time in decades, I was no longer in my own space. I was a guest who had, unknowingly, paid for the entire trip. The first few weeks passed in a kind of artificial peace. Rick remained thoughtful on the surface, asking now and then if I needed anything. But I started to notice the small things, the subtle shifts in the atmosphere. The smell of liquor on him grew stronger when he came home in the evenings. Sometimes his eyes were bloodshot, his words slurring together in a way that was hard to follow. He started coming home later, and on some nights, I'd be awake to hear the telltale rattle of his key in the lock just before dawn. When I'd ask about the money from the house sale, he'd always wave it away. "Don't you worry, Mom. It's safe. That's your nest egg for your retirement." The words were still sweet, but his eyes would never meet mine. I began to feel like I was walking on a thin sheet of ice, never knowing when it might crack beneath my feet. The anxiety was like a low, constant hum in my ears, not loud, but always there. One morning, a bill came in the mail from the hospital for a routine checkup I'd had. I needed to pay it. I gathered all my courage, waited for a moment when Rick seemed his most sober, and timidly brought up the joint account he'd mentioned. Rick, I started, clutching the paper in my hand, I need a little money for this doctor's bill. He was watching TV and didn't even bother to turn his head. How much? He asked, his tone clipped and flat. I told him the amount. He let out a short, contemptuous sniff. Always money, he muttered under his breath. Then he stood up, went into his bedroom, and came back with a few crumpled bills that he tossed on the coffee table. Here, take it. His attitude left me stunned. That wasn't the way a son cares for his mother. It was the way you'd give a handout to a beggar on the street. I stood there for a long moment, just looking at the wrinkled cash on the table, feeling my own dignity crumble and wrinkle right along with it. The ice finally broke on a Friday night. Rick came home staggering, reeking of cheap whiskey. My fear had been building for weeks, and a desperate sort of bravery took over. I asked him again about the money from the sale, my voice trembling slightly. Rick, we need to be clear about this. I need to know where that money is. He spun around to face me, his eyes wild and red. He didn't say a word. He just closed the distance between us and shoved me with his whole body. It happened so fast, I couldn't even react. My back slammed against the drywall behind me with a sickening, hollow thud. A sharp, searing pain shot through my shoulder blade, and my knees almost gave out. He stumbled back a step, a grotesque smirk twisting his lips. Just slipped, he slurred. You're getting old, Mom. Gotta watch your step. He turned and lurched into his room, leaving me there, trembling, one hand clutching my throbbing shoulder. The physical pain was nothing compared to the shock that ripped through me. The ice hadn't just cracked, it had shattered. After that night, a heavy, tense silence fell over the house. Rick acted as if nothing had happened. He avoided me, and when we did pass in the hallway, he looked right through me as if I were made of glass. And I was silent too. I was scared. The fear was a living thing, weaving itself into my every breath. I was scared of the sound of his footsteps in the hall. I was scared of the sound of his key in the lock. I was scared to ask for anything that might set him off. I stayed in my room most of the day, reading my Bible over and over, trying to find comfort in the familiar passages. But even the prayers felt hollow. That shove had broken more than just my sense of safety. It had broken the last thread of trust I had in him. I realized I was living with a monster, and I was utterly, terrifyingly alone. My friend Martha, from the women's group at my old church, called to check in. I hadn't spoken to anyone in weeks. Hearing her warm, kind voice, I could barely hold back my tears. Bethany, are you all right? We haven't heard from you in ages. I tried to keep my voice steady. I'm fine, Martha. Just getting used to the new place. But my voice betrayed me. It was thin and shaky. You don't sound like yourself. Is everything okay? Is that boy of yours treating you right? I glanced nervously at my closed bedroom door, my heart pounding. He's wonderful. He takes good care of me. Every lie tasted like ash in my mouth. I made an excuse and cut the call short. After I hung up, I looked in the small mirror on the wall and didn't recognize the woman staring back at me. She had frightened eyes and a horrible secret that was eating her from the inside out. Rick was getting bolder. One afternoon, I accidentally spilled a glass of water on the table. He didn't yell. He did something worse. He walked over, grabbed my upper arm, and squeezed. Hard. "Be a little more careful, Gigi," he hissed through his teeth, his face close to mine. His breath was a sour wave of stale alcohol. He held me for just a few seconds, but his fingers felt like an iron clamp. After he let go and walked away, I looked down at my arm. The angry red imprints of his 5 fingers were already forming. By the next morning, they had blossomed into a ghastly set of deep purple bruises. I had to wear a long-sleeved sweater in the sweltering North Carolina summer to hide them. I was ashamed. A toxic shame washed over me, as if I had done something to deserve it, as if it were my fault. That bruise was the proof. It was the undeniable physical proof that I was trapped. My deepest fears began to take shape the day Rick took my keys. It all started with a sickeningly sweet lie, his voice dripping with false concern. "You've been so forgetful lately, Mom. I'm just worried you'll go for a walk and get lost," he said. "From now on, just let me hold on to the keys for safekeeping. If you need to go anywhere, I'll take you." I tried to protest, to form the words that would defend my own competence, but a single cold glare from him was enough to make the words die in my throat. And so it began. Every morning before he left for work, I would hear the sound, the scrape of the key, the definitive metallic click of the deadbolt sliding into place from the outside. His modern, comfortable house had officially become my prison. My only connection to the world was through the living room window. I'd watch the neighbors walk their dogs, watch the kids come home from school, their laughter muffled by the glass. I was a prisoner in the very home I had paid for, under the guise of being cared for. My isolation became absolute. One afternoon, Martha, probably sick with worry, didn't call. She drove over and rang the doorbell. My heart leapt into my throat. I rushed to the door, my hands fumbling with the doorknob I knew wouldn't turn. It was locked. I pressed my eye to the peephole and saw her dear, worried face looking back. I tapped softly on the door, a pathetic little signal, hoping she might hear. Just then, Rick's car pulled into the driveway. He saw Martha on the porch, then his eyes flicked to the peephole, and I knew he saw me. He unlocked the door, his face instantly transforming into a mask of pleasantry. "Hello?" he said smoothly to Martha, blocking the doorway. "Mom isn't feeling too well today." After she left, disappointed and confused, he shut the door with a loud bang. The mask was gone. His face was twisted with fury. "Did you call her here?" he snarled. I stammered, "No, I didn't." I never finished the sentence. A searing, white-hot sting exploded across my cheek. He had slapped me so hard my head snapped to the side and my ear began to ring. "Shut your mouth!" he spat. "Don't you go crying to your old biddy friends." That slap did more than hurt my face. It silenced the last tiny whisper of hope that help might come from the outside world. Mealtimes became a form of torture. More often than not, Rick wouldn't eat with me. He'd come home with a greasy bag of fast food and eat alone in front of the television. On the rare occasions we did sit at the table, the silence was as heavy and suffocating as a lead blanket. I never dared to look up from my plate, just mechanically moving the fork to my mouth. The food had no taste. It was just something to be swallowed. Sometimes he'd break the silence with a single cruel remark. "Eat up. It's my money paying for it." Or, "Useless old woman." His words hurt more than the shoves and the grabs. They were like acid, eating away at my sense of self, making me feel small and worthless. I started eating less, and the weight began to fall off me. My clothes hung loosely on my shrinking frame. I was slowly disappearing, even to myself. My world shrank until it was only the size of my bedroom and the few possessions I'd brought with me. My old Bible and the photograph of Clara were my only companions. I kept her picture on my nightstand. It was the first thing I saw when I woke up and the last thing I saw before I closed my eyes. I talked to her. I told her about my fear. I asked her what I should do. Of course, the photograph never answered, but just speaking the words aloud, even to a memory, helped me hold on to a fragile piece of my sanity. The Bible was different. The scriptures about suffering and salvation that had once been the bedrock of my life now felt distant and hollow. My faith was being tested in the cruelest way imaginable. I would pray, no longer for rescue, but just for the strength to endure one more day. The physical abuse became more frequent, more casual. It wasn't just the angry grabs anymore. It was a hard shoulder check as I passed him in the hall. A foot stuck out just enough to make me stumble. Each incident left a new, ugly bruise on my aging skin. I became an expert at hiding them. Long sleeves, high-necked blouses, even a dab of Clara's old foundation to cover a fading mark on my cheek. The shame was a poison that had seeped into my bones. I was terrified of anyone seeing. I was terrified they would ask, and I knew with a certainty that made me sick that I would only lie again. The physical pain, as sharp as it was, I could bear. But the humiliation of hiding another person's crimes, of pretending everything was fine, that was what was truly killing me from the inside. I spent hours every day sitting at my bedroom window, just watching the street below. I learned the rhythm of the entire neighborhood. The man next door walked his golden retriever at 7 a.m. The mail carrier arrived around 11. The school bus dropped the kids off at 3 in the afternoon. They were all part of a normal world, a world from which I had been completely erased. I yearned to just step outside, to feel a breeze on my face, to feel the warmth of the sun on my skin without a pane of glass in between. I craved the simple act of saying hello to the mail carrier or smiling at a child. These were the smallest, most basic human connections, things I had once taken for granted, and now they felt like an impossible luxury. I was living, but not truly alive. Sitting at that window, watching the world go by, I have never felt so invisible. Have you ever felt like your voice wasn't being heard? Like your very presence was being ignored in your own home? If you have, I hope you'll share your story in the comments below. Sometimes, just knowing you're not alone is a comfort in itself. I began to learn the rhythm of his rage. It always came after he'd been gone for a few days, returning empty-handed with the darkness swirling around him. I would later learn these were his trips to the casinos in the next city over. One night, he came back drunker than I'd ever seen him, the bitter stench of a massive loss clinging to him like a shroud. He started destroying the living room. The TV remote shattered against the wall. He kicked the coffee table over, sending magazines and coasters scattering across the floor. Terrified, I tried to speak, my voice a small, useless thing. "Rick, please, just calm down." He turned on me. His eyes shot through with red veins. He didn't hit me. He kicked the arm of the chair I was clinging to for support. The force sent me sprawling onto the hardwood floor. As I tried to scramble up to get my hands and knees under me, he kicked again, his boot connecting squarely with my shin. A white-hot, bone-deep pain shot up my leg, and I cried out, a sharp, wounded sound. It was in that moment I realized this was different. He didn't just want to hurt me anymore. He wanted to destroy me. My heart had started to give me trouble. The doctor said it was from prolonged stress and put me on a daily medication. As I watched the pills in the bottle disappear one by one, a new kind of fear grew inside me. I knew I would have to ask Rick for money to get a refill. I put it off until the very last day, until only a single small pill was left. With trembling hands, I gave him the prescription slip and told him I needed the money. He snatched the paper from my hand, glanced at it, and then crushed it into a tight ball. "More money?" he roared. "My money isn't here to support some sick old woman." I tried to plead with him, to explain that I couldn't manage without the medication. He suddenly raised his hand, and I flinched instinctively, squeezing my eyes shut, bracing for the slap. But it didn't come. Instead, he brought his fist down in a brutal, hammering blow onto my shoulder, right on the same spot he'd injured before. The impact sent me stumbling sideways, and the empty pill bottle slipped from my numb fingers, skittering across the floor. After the blow, he leaned down, his face inches from mine. His voice was a low, venomous whisper. "Why don't you just die and get it over with?" That sentence, more than the punch, froze the blood in my veins. This wasn't a loss of control. It was a clear, articulate wish. He wanted me gone. I was a burden he was no longer willing to bear, an expense he wanted to eliminate. That night, I went to bed without my heart medication. A tight band of pain wrapped around my chest, and every beat of my old, tired heart felt like a struggle. Lying there in the dark, listening to the sound of my own ragged breathing, I honestly wondered if I would see the morning. I wasn't afraid of dying, but I was terrified of dying here, in this house, at the hands of that monster. Then, a flicker of an idea, hope. I remembered an old flip phone I'd kept, tucked away in the pocket of a winter coat in the back of the closet. The battery had been dead for years. The next day, while Rick was out, I searched the house frantically for the old charger. By some miracle, I found it, tangled in a junk drawer in the kitchen. I locked myself in my room, my heart hammering against my ribs as I plugged the phone in. After hours of anxious waiting, a faint light appeared on the tiny screen. It had enough life for one call. I waited until well after midnight, until the sounds from Rick's room told me he had finally passed out from the alcohol. I crept out of my room, holding my breath with every step. My plan was simple: get to the front door, run outside, and call 911. But as my hand closed around the cool metal of the doorknob, a floorboard beneath my feet let out a loud, groaning creak. Rick was awake instantly. He burst from his room like a caged animal. "What do you think you're doing?" he screamed. He saw the phone in my hand. Everything happened at once. He lunged for it, and I instinctively clutched my only hope tighter. As we struggled, his long, dirty fingernails raked down my cheek. I felt my skin tear, a sharp, stinging line of fire, and then the wet warmth of blood. The sudden pain made me loosen my grip. He ripped the phone from my hand, threw it to the floor, and brought the heel of his boot down on it again and again, grinding it into a useless pile of plastic and shattered glass. Then he looked at me, at the bleeding gash on my face. There was no remorse in his eyes, only a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. "Don't even think about it again," he hissed, before storming back to his room and slamming the door. I stood there, one hand pressed to my burning cheek, staring at the broken pieces of my phone, of my hope, scattered on the floor. The next morning, the cut had dried into a dark red line across my face. It wasn't a deep scar, but it was there, a permanent reminder. I looked in the mirror and saw for the first time a piece of evidence that couldn't be denied or hidden by a long sleeve. It was on my face for the world to see. But the terrible irony was that my world contained no one. There was no one to see it. That scar became a part of me. It was the brand of his betrayal, of his cruelty. And in the dark days that followed, every time my fingers brushed against it, I was reminded of that horrible night and of the crushing certainty that for me, there was no way out. Rick started bringing strange things home: an expensive men's watch, a brand new set of golf clubs. He'd claimed they were bonuses from work, but I knew he was lying. He didn't even have a steady job. One afternoon, I was dusting in his room when I accidentally knocked over a stack of magazines on his nightstand. Fanned out between the pages was a sheaf of papers. Curiosity got the better of me. I picked them up. They were pawn shop receipts. My heart seized in my chest. I read the descriptions of the items, my breath catching with each line. Mr. Evans' coin collection, Mrs. Evans' gold necklace, Clara's wedding ring. He had sold them all. Every last keepsake of my husband and my daughter, the precious few things I believed were stored safely, had been traded for cash, for his gambling habit. The final blow was the last piece of paper. It wasn't a pawn ticket. It was a bank statement for our supposed joint account. I squinted, my eyes struggling to focus on the tiny print. The opening deposit was there, the exact amount from the sale of my house. It was followed by a long, sickening list of cash withdrawals, large, even sums pulled out week after week from ATMs near casinos. And there, at the very bottom of the page, was the current balance, $17.42. He had taken everything. My entire retirement fund, the result of a lifetime of work my husband and I had put in, was gone. I stood there in his messy room, the paper trembling in my hand. It wasn't anger I felt. It was a terrifying emptiness. It was all gone. I don't know where the strength came from. Maybe it was the kind of strength you only find at the bottom of absolute despair. That evening, when Rick came home, I was waiting for him in the living room. I held the pawn receipts and the bank statement in my hand. "Where is the money, Rick?" I asked. My voice was strange to my own ears, cold and steady in a way I didn't recognize. He saw the papers, and the color drained from his face. He tried to deny it, to turn it back on me, sputtering that I'd been snooping, that it was none of my business, but I didn't back down. "You sold Clara's wedding ring," I said, the words catching in my throat as tears finally started to well in my eyes. "You took everything." The mention of Clara's name was the final straw. The mask of fake indignation on his face dissolved, replaced by a primal, ugly rage. He came at me like a cornered animal. This wasn't a shove or a slap. This was a beating. He punched and he kicked, grabbing a fistful of my hair and yanking my head back. I fell to the floor, trying to curl into a ball to shield my head with my arms, but he didn't stop. He kicked me in the ribs, in my back. I heard a sickening crack, and I knew a bone had broken. Each blow was a fresh wave of agony that tore through my body. I couldn't scream anymore, only let out these weak, broken moans. Through a blur of tears, I saw his face, twisted and hideous, stripped of all humanity. In that moment, I truly believed he was going to kill me. When his rage was finally spent, he grabbed the collar of my nightgown and dragged me. My body scraped uselessly against the floorboards as he pulled me toward the front door. He wrenched it open. Outside, a furious storm was raging, and a blast of cold, wet wind hit my face. Without a word, he threw me through the doorway with all his might. I tumbled down the cold, slick concrete steps, my body crying out in protest. I lay there in my thin nightgown, soaked to the skin in the pouring rain. He stood in the doorway above me, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. Then he slammed the door shut. The final, definitive click of the deadbolt echoed in the night. I had been thrown out like a piece of trash. I lay in a puddle on the sidewalk for I don't know how long. The rain hammered down on my face, mixing with the tears and the blood from a cut on my lip. My entire body was a symphony of pain. Every breath sent a sharp, stabbing message from my broken rib. The cold. It was a deep, penetrating cold that seeped into my very bones. I tried to push myself up, but I couldn't move. I could only lie there, looking up at a starless black void of a sky. It was over. I had no home, no money, no family. All I had was a broken body and a heart that had been utterly shattered. I closed my eyes, feeling my consciousness begin to fade at the edges. Maybe, I thought, just dying like this would be a kind of release. It was the last thing I thought before everything went dark. I don't know how long I was unconscious. The first thing I remember is the flashing red and blue lights of an ambulance painting the rain-soaked street. A neighbor, I guess, must have heard the commotion and called 911. Two paramedics gently loaded me onto a stretcher, their careful movements a stark contrast to the violence that had put me there. Every slight shift sent waves of agony through my body. At the hospital, they told me the damage: 2 broken ribs, a severely sprained ankle, and more bruises than they could count. They wrapped my ribs, splinted my ankle, gave me something for the pain, and then they asked the question I was dreading. "What happened to you, ma'am?" I couldn't tell them the truth. The shame, even then, was a heavy blanket smothering the words. I fell down the stairs," I mumbled. I couldn't bear the thought of anyone knowing my son-in-law, Clara's husband, was a monster. After a few days, when the hospital could no longer keep me, a social worker came to my room. She had a kind but weary face. She told me she was taking me to a shelter. The homeless shelter was an old, crowded building that smelled perpetually of dampness and bleach. I was assigned a top bunk in a large dormitory, a room I shared with dozens of other women. The nights were a symphony of shared sorrow, of snores and coughs and quiet, muffled weeping in the dark. There was no privacy, no silence. The meals were watery soup and stale bread, but it was a roof over my head, and for that I had to be grateful. For the first few days, I barely left my bunk. The broken ribs made every breath feel like swallowing glass. My swollen ankle meant I couldn't walk without a pair of crutches. I felt like a shipwrecked vessel, battered to pieces by a storm, and washed up on some strange, desolate shore. I didn't speak to anyone. I just watched, and I saw that every face in that room held its own sad story. The physical pain eventually dulled, thanks to the cheap painkillers they handed out. But the pain in my mind was relentless. At night, when the dormitory was finally quiet, the images would return. I'd be back on the floor of Rick's living room, feeling the impact of his fists, hearing the sickening crack of my own bones. I'd see his face, distorted with a rage that wasn't human. I'd wake up with a gasp, my thin nightgown soaked in a cold sweat, my heart hammering against my broken ribs. The scar on my cheek was healing, but it was a constant physical reminder. Sometimes, in the crowded common room, a man would raise his hand too quickly to scratch his head, and I would flinch, my body tensing for a blow that wasn't coming. The abuse had carved its fear into my very reflexes, making it a part of me I couldn't control. It was during one of those long, sleepless nights that, for the first time in my life, I questioned God. I was raised in the church. Faith was the foundation of my world, the compass that had guided me through every storm. I had always believed that if I lived a good life, God would protect me. But now, lying on that lumpy, squeaking mattress, my body aching and my heart hollowed out, I couldn't feel his presence anywhere. I whispered into my pillow, tears streaming down my face. "Why?" I asked the silence. "Why would you let this happen to me? What did I do to deserve this?" There was no answer, only the stale air of the crowded room and the soft breathing of the other broken women around me. My faith, which had always been my lighthouse, seemed to have finally gone dark, leaving me completely adrift in the darkness. Life went on in a gray, hopeless blur. Until one afternoon, a younger woman from the bunk next to mine saw me struggling to get up on my crutches. She came over and held out a chocolate bar. "You look like you could use this," she said, offering a smile that was tired but deeply kind. It had been so long since anyone had shown me a simple human kindness. I took it from her, my hand trembling slightly, and managed a quiet "thank you." That small gesture, a single candy bar, was like the first ray of sun after a long, dark winter. It didn't fix anything. It didn't mend my ribs or give me back my home. But it reminded me that even in the darkest of places, goodness could still exist. When my ankle was strong enough to bear my weight, I started to venture outside. My only destination was the public library a few blocks away. It was quiet there. It was warm, and it was free. At first, I didn't read. I would just sit for hours in one of the comfortable chairs, soaking in the peace. I'd watch the mothers reading to their children, the students hunched over their textbooks, the old men reading the newspaper. The library was another world, a world of order and knowledge, the complete opposite of the chaos that had become my life. Slowly, I started to pick up books, not novels, but books about gardening, about history. Focusing on the words on the page helped me escape, just for a little while. The library became my new sanctuary, a place where I could just be without judgment or fear. In the silence of that library, I often found myself wondering how a person can lose everything and still go on living. Have you ever faced a moment in your life where all hope felt lost, where you didn't know where you'd find the strength to take the next step? I would be grateful to hear how you found your light in the darkest of times in the comments below. My life had settled into a grim, monotonous rhythm. Nights at the shelter, days at the library. For lunch, I'd make my way to a soup kitchen run by a local church. The food was a little better there, a little warmer. One day, as I was sitting alone, nursing my bowl of soup, a man walked in who was so completely out of place it was jarring. He was wearing a clean-pressed suit, his shoes polished to a shine. He seemed to be looking for someone, his gaze scanning the worn faces in the room. And then his eyes landed on me. He started walking directly toward my table. Instantly, my entire body went rigid. My heart began to pound a frantic, panicked rhythm against my ribs. Experience had taught me a harsh lesson. Be wary of strange men. "Excuse me, are you Bethany Evans?" he asked. His voice was gentle, polite. But the moment he said my name, something ancient and terrified took over. I flinched, my hands flying up to shield my face as if he were about to strike me. It was a shameful, involuntary reaction, the movement of a cornered animal. The man stopped in his tracks, his expression one of pure shock. He quickly took a step back, holding his hands up in a gesture of peace. "Please don't be afraid," he said, his voice soft. "My name is David Davis. I'm an attorney. I'm here to help you." His words didn't calm me. A lawyer? I thought, my mind racing. Why would a lawyer be looking for me in a place like this? Mr. Davis patiently sat down in the chair opposite me, keeping a respectful distance between us. He slowly reached into his coat, pulled out a business card, and slid it across the table. "I'm the executor of your daughter's estate, Clara Evans." Hearing Clara's name felt like the world had stopped spinning. "Clara?" I whispered, the name a ghost on my lips. My Clara didn't have an estate. She had nothing." Mr. Davis shook his head gently. "Yes, ma'am, she did. A very detailed one, in fact. My firm was retained by your daughter several years ago. She left us with very specific instructions to contact you only under particular circumstances." He looked me directly in the eye then, and I saw not pity, but a deep, sincere compassion. "Mrs. Evans," he said, his voice full of a gravity that made me listen. "Your daughter knew. She knew you might be in danger." I just stared at him, my head swimming. A part of me, the grieving mother's heart, desperately wanted to believe him. It was a beautiful, impossible thought that Clara was somehow, somewhere, still watching over me. But the other part of me, the part that had been broken and betrayed, was screaming in suspicion. What if this was another trap? What if Rick had sent this man to lure me into some new cruel game? Fear and doubt had become my second nature, my only means of survival. I don't understand," I stammered. "I have nothing. Why are you looking for me?" Mr. Davis let out a long, slow sigh. "It's a complicated story, ma'am. Would you allow me to buy you a cup of coffee? Somewhere a little quieter? I promise. I will explain everything." I sat there for a long time, the sounds of the soup kitchen fading into a dull roar around me. I looked down at my own thin, chapped hands resting on the table, then up at Mr. Davis's patient, waiting face. What did I have left to lose? I was already at the bottom. Maybe it was time to take one last chance on trust. "All right," I said, the word barely a whisper. "A cup of coffee." For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I stepped out of my small, grim world. I left the shelter, the library, the soup kitchen behind, and slid into the passenger seat of Mr. Davis's car. It was a luxury vehicle, quiet and smooth, and it smelled of new leather. It felt like a vessel from another planet. As he pulled away from the curb, I looked back at the soup kitchen's humble storefront. It felt like I was leaving a whole chapter of my life behind, even though I had no idea what lay ahead. We went to a small, quiet cafe a few miles away. After a waitress brought us our coffee, Mr. Davis got straight to the point. "Mrs. Evans, your daughter was a genius. She was an exceptionally talented software developer. She worked for a major tech firm under a professional pseudonym, and she accumulated a significant fortune. I listened, trying to make sense of the words. My Clara, my quiet, humble girl who never cared for fancy things? I had no idea. And, Mr. Davis continued, his gaze unwavering, she had an incredible foresight into Rick's character. She was worried about your safety, terribly worried. So she created a very unique last will and testament, with a series of trusts and provisions specifically designed to protect you from your own husband. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. A secret. My daughter had kept this monumental secret from me, and that secret, somehow, had led this kind man to find me at the bottom of my world. A significant fortune? I asked, my voice still laced with the disbelief that had become my constant companion. How significant? Mr. Davis took a deep breath, as if to steady himself before delivering a blow. Mrs. Evans, the total net value of the estate left by Clara, including stocks, investments, and software patents, is currently valued at approximately $73 million. The number just hung in the air between us, shimmering and unreal. 73 million. The figure was so absurd, so nonsensical, that I almost laughed out loud. Me, a woman whose greatest joy yesterday was a free chocolate bar in a homeless shelter, the heir to such a staggering sum? I just shook my head. That's impossible. There has to be some kind of mistake. But Mr. Davis's gaze never wavered. There is no mistake, ma'am. It is all legally documented, and you are the sole beneficiary. Then why? I started, my mind desperately trying to find a logical flaw in this unbelievable story. Why are you only finding me now? That, Mr. Davis said, leaning forward slightly, is because of the special provisions in the will. Clara stipulated that the full inheritance was to be released to you if, and only if, you were no longer living with or financially entangled with Rick in any way. She hired a private investigative firm with a retainer to discreetly monitor your situation. When their report came through that you had been forced from the home and were living in a shelter, that provision was triggered. It was her way of ensuring that Rick could never touch a single penny of it. When he said that, I couldn't hold it in any longer. I lowered my head to the cool surface of the table, and I began to sob. I wasn't crying for the money. I was crying for my daughter. I cried for the devastating realization that in her final years, she must have lived in a state of quiet terror. She knew what kind of man her husband was. She knew I was in danger. And all alone, she had silently orchestrated a rescue plan for me from beyond the grave. And I, her mother, had been completely oblivious. I was so wrapped up in my own grief after she was gone that I never saw the suffering she must have endured right beside me. I clutched my chest, feeling the dull ache from my ribs that still hadn't fully healed. That physical pain was nothing compared to the anguish in my heart, the pain of regret, and of a boundless, overwhelming love. My Clara, my brave, brilliant girl. Mr. Davis sat in silence, giving me the space to grieve. When my sobs finally subsided, he spoke gently. Mrs. Evans, your daughter loved you very much. She did everything in her power to protect you. I lifted my head, wiping the tears from my cheeks, and in that moment, a profound clarity washed over me. This wasn't luck. This wasn't a coincidence. This was an answer. It was the answer to my desperate whispered prayers in the darkness of the shelter. God hadn't abandoned me. He had answered me through the love and foresight of my child. The faith I thought I had lost came rushing back, not as a blind belief, but as something stronger, deeper, forged in fire. It was a faith in the enduring power of love and sacrifice, and in a grander plan that I was only just beginning to see. "What do I do now?" I asked him, and for the first time the question was filled not with despair, but with a genuine spark of hope. "The first step," he said, "is to get you out of that shelter. We've arranged for a suite at a comfortable hotel. You can stay there as long as you need. Then we begin the necessary legal proceedings." He started talking about transferring assets, about hiring a team of financial managers, but my mind was already somewhere else. "Mr. Davis," I said, my voice firm and clear, "I want to sue Rick. I want him to pay for what he's done." He looked at me, a flicker of surprise in his eyes, which was quickly replaced by a small, determined smile. "I was hoping you would say that," he said. "Don't you worry, Mrs. Evans. We have the best litigators in the state." That night, in a luxurious hotel suite, I took my first hot bath in months. I sank into the steaming water, letting it wash away the grime of the shelter, knowing it could never wash away the memories. Afterward, wrapped in a soft plush bathrobe, I stood in front of the large, clean mirror. The scar on my cheek was still there, a thin, pale line against my skin. But when I looked at it now, I no longer felt shame. I felt survival. The woman in the mirror was not the same one who had flinched in the soup kitchen. She wasn't the broken victim cowering in a corner. This was a woman who had walked through hell and come back. This was Clara's mother. And this was a fighter. My daughter's legacy wasn't just the money. The greatest inheritance she had given me was the strength to fight back. The weeks that followed were a blur of depositions and strategy meetings in a high-rise office building that felt like another planet. My new life was a series of conferences in quiet, wood-paneled rooms surrounded by lawyers. They methodically gathered the weapons we would need for the fight ahead. The thick stack of medical reports from the hospital, detailing my broken ribs and sprained ankle, the official transcript of the neighbor's 911 call, her panicked voice a chilling echo of that night, and to my surprise, a folder of digital photos I'd taken with an old camera, documenting the ugly purple blooms of bruises on my arms and legs. I barely remember taking them, but some instinct for survival must have guided my hand. Each time I had to recount the story, it felt like picking at a wound. But something was different now. I was no longer a solitary victim whispering into the darkness. I was a witness, flanked by a team of sharp, dedicated people who listened intently, who wrote down every word, and who, most importantly, looked me in the eye and believed me. With each retelling, the trauma lessened, and a sense of purpose grew in its place. It was no longer just a memory that haunted me. It was testimony. Every word I spoke, every painful detail I relived, became another solid brick in the wall of justice we were building against Rick. When Rick was served with the lawsuit, his true cowardice revealed itself. He somehow got the number for the hotel and began leaving a series of desperate, wheezing voicemails. His voice, once so full of menace, was now slick with false tears. He begged for my forgiveness, claiming he was a sick man, that a demon got into him sometimes. He swore he loved me, that he thought of me as his own mother. Listening to the recordings with Mr. Davis, I felt a profound and surprising nothingness. There was no anger, no flicker of pity, just a cold, quiet void where my fear of him used to be. His words were hollow, meaningless sounds. Mr. Davis's investigators had painted a much clearer picture of the real Rick. His past was a pathetic trail of failed jobs, bounced checks, and staggering gambling debts. They even uncovered a 2-year-old restraining order filed by a former girlfriend, her report detailing a pattern of violent outbursts fueled by alcohol and losses. The monster hadn't been created in my presence. He had been there all along. I had just been too blinded by grief and love for my daughter to see him. On the day of the trial, I chose my armor carefully. A simple but elegant navy blue suit, the color of quiet authority. I was able to walk without my cane now, a small victory that felt monumental. As I stepped into the solemn, quiet courtroom, I saw him. Rick was slumped at the defendant's table, looking sallow and shrunken, a cheap suit hanging off his frame. He glanced up, saw me, and immediately looked away, unable to hold my gaze. In that moment, as I took my seat beside Miss Miller, I felt a wave of calm so pure it was almost startling. The fear was completely gone. Here, in this room governed by rules and consequences, protected by the stony-faced bailiffs and the weight of the law, he was just a man. The power had shifted. He was no longer my captor. He was the one in the cage. When my name was called, I walked to the witness stand, my heart beating a strong, steady rhythm. My lawyer, Ms. Miller, a formidable woman with sharp eyes and a sharper mind, stood and approached me. She began gently. "Mrs. Evans," she said, her voice filling the silent room, "would you please tell the court how you received the scar on your cheek?" I took a deep, steadying breath, and I began to speak. I told them everything, my voice gaining strength with every word. I spoke of the first shove, the shock and disbelief. I described the bruises, the slap that rang in my ears, the click of the deadbolt that became the sound of my imprisonment. I recounted the final brutal beating. My voice cracked once when I spoke of him selling Clara's ring, but I did not weep. I looked at the faces of the jury, men and women, strangers who were now the keepers of my story. I pushed back the sleeve of my suit jacket, revealing the faint, silvery lines on my forearm. "I'm not telling you this for your pity," I said, my voice clear and strong. "I'm telling you this so that the truth can finally be heard." Rick's lawyer tried his best to dismantle me. He portrayed me as a lonely, confused old woman, addled by grief, prone to falls and fabricating stories. He suggested I was vindictive, blaming Rick for not being able to save Clara. But Miss Miller was a shield. She calmly eviscerated his arguments with an avalanche of facts. She produced the medical records, the date-stamped photographs of my injuries, the neighbor's sworn testimony. She projected my bank statements onto a screen for all to see, a damning flowchart of my life savings draining directly into the cash machines of Atlantic City. Under Miss Miller's cross-examination, Rick crumbled. He stammered, his stories shifting and contradicting each other. The final fatal blow came when she presented the pawn tickets. "Mr. Evans, is this your signature? Did you, or did you not, sell your deceased wife's wedding ring for $200? That's when he exploded. He shot to his feet, a torrent of vile, incoherent rage spewing from his lips, his face contorting into the ugly mask I knew so well. In that moment, he showed the entire court the monster I had lived with. The jury was out for less than an hour. The wait was agonizing, but I felt a strange calm. When they filed back in, a heavy silence fell over the courtroom. I watched the foreman, a stern-looking woman, hand a piece of paper to the clerk. She stood, cleared her throat, and read the verdict. Guilty. Guilty on all counts. A tidal wave of relief, so immense and powerful it almost took my breath away, washed over me. The tears I had held back for so long finally fell, hot and cleansing. Tears of release. I had done it. For me, for Clara. They cuffed him. As they led him away, his shoulders slumped in defeat, he looked at me one last time. There was no apology in his eyes, no flicker of remorse, only a dark, venomous hatred. But it didn't matter. It couldn't touch me anymore. He was powerless now. After the trial, my life was rebuilt from the ground up. With the legal battles over, my world changed in ways I could barely comprehend. The constant gnawing worry about money, a companion for most of my adult life, was simply gone. I could buy anything I wanted, go anywhere I pleased. Mr. Davis and his team helped me find a lovely, sunny apartment with a balcony overlooking a park. It was secure, quiet, and entirely my own. I bought new clothes that fit my recovering frame and enjoyed good, nourishing meals that I hadn't had to wait in line for. But I quickly learned that these comforts, as welcome as they were, couldn't fill the void inside me. The luxury felt hollow, the freedom directionless. I had survived. I had found justice. But now I faced a much larger and more daunting question. What was I to do with the rest of my life, and with this staggering legacy my daughter had left me? The answer came to me one afternoon back at the public library, my old, quiet sanctuary. I was sitting in my usual chair when I saw another older woman across the room. She had a bruise high on her cheekbone, poorly concealed with a thick layer of makeup. She sat alone, her shoulders hunched, and in her eyes I saw the same haunted, lost look I remember seeing in my own reflection. In that instant I saw myself as I had been just a few months before. It was a painful, powerful recognition. I realized just how many of us there were, women of my generation, suffering in silence, with nowhere to go and no one to trust. They needed a safe harbor. They needed to know someone would listen. And suddenly, with a clarity that felt like a lightning bolt, I knew what I had to do. Clara's legacy wasn't meant for me alone. It was meant for all the mothers and grandmothers like me. I presented my idea to Mr. Davis and his team. I told them I wanted to use the majority of the estate to establish a foundation, to create a state-of-the-art shelter specifically for elderly victims of abuse. It wouldn't just be a place with a bed and a meal. It would be a center for healing, offering medical care, legal aid, and trauma therapy, all free of charge. Their support was immediate and overwhelming. We found a large building, a former bed and breakfast, and began the work of transforming it. I was involved in every decision, from choosing the warm, calming paint colors for the walls to picking out the comfortable, dignified furniture. I wanted it to feel like a real home. We named it Clara's Haven. On the day we opened, I stood at the front door to welcome our first residents. They were women whose stories echoed my own, women who carried their scars both inside and out. As I looked at their faces, I felt no pity. I felt a deep, unwavering empathy. I took each of their hands in mine and said the words I had once longed to hear. Welcome home. You're safe now. No one can hurt you here anymore. I spent my days at the Haven, becoming not just its founder, but a part of its community. I listened to their stories. I worked alongside them in the therapy garden we built out back. I read to them in the evenings. I found the woman I used to be, the nurse, the caregiver, and realized I had missed her. My own pain seemed to lessen as I helped to soothe the pain of others. In the garden at Clara's Haven, we planted dozens of rose bushes, just like the ones from my old house. One sunny afternoon, I was trimming spent blooms with a resident named Eleanor. She stopped her work and turned to me, a small, genuine smile on her face. "You know, Bethany," she said, her voice soft, "before I came here, I thought my life was over. But now I wake up every morning excited to see if a new bud has opened." Her words moved me to tears. I realized we weren't just growing flowers. We were cultivating hope. We were healing together one day at a time. This was Clara's real legacy, not the numbers in a bank account, but the smiles, the tears that were finally safe to be shed, and the quiet peace settling over souls that had long been in turmoil. That evening, I sat alone on my apartment balcony, looking out at the peaceful park below. I took out the old photograph of Clara, the one of her at 10 years old, her smile so bright it could have lit up the world. I didn't cry anymore when I looked at it. I simply smiled back. "We did it, sweetheart," I whispered to the evening air. "I'm okay, and I'm using the love you left me to help other people be okay too." A soft breeze rustled the leaves in the trees below, carrying the sweet scent of night-blooming jasmine. And in that quiet, perfect moment, I felt her there with me, as if she were smiling, telling me she was proud. My story began with a devastating loss, but it ends with a discovery of justice, of purpose, and finally, of peace. Holding that old photograph, I finally felt at peace, as if Clara's love had come full circle, not just to save me, but to build something new. And now, sitting here with you, I feel that same sense of connection, of stories waiting to be shared. You know, as we sit here together and my story has poured out like a stream, I want to open my heart a little more. And I truly hope to hear yours in return. Sometimes, just a simple click on a screen, a like, a subscribe, or a share might seem like a small passing gesture to many. But for me, and for the quiet voices that need to be shared, every single one of those clicks is like a small candle in the dark. It's a silent way of saying, "I see you, I hear you. Your story matters." It reminds me that we are not invisible. Just a simple click from you is a powerful statement of support for me, and it gives me the strength to continue sharing these stories. After my story was told, something changed in me. For so many weeks, all I wanted was for someone, anyone, to hear my voice. And now that you have listened, I realize that what I want most is to hear yours. Down below, in that comment section, I would be so honored if you would share a piece of your story with me. Tell me about a time you felt you weren't being heard. Tell me about a passion that others might have thought was silly. Or tell me about a moment you found your own strength, even in the smallest, quietest way. I will read them. I will carry them with me, because your story, your life, matters. We want to build Sapphire Revenge into a community where we can share these stories from the bottom of our hearts. I know you have your own private stories that can sometimes be hard to share with family or friends. I am here to listen, to share in your joys and sorrows, because we all have the right to be respected and to be heard. If you don't have a sad story like the one I've been through, then please share your joys. Tell me about something good that happened to you today. Please share it with me. It will be a tremendous source of encouragement, helping me and everyone else watching to heal, to find faith and motivation in our lives. If you're watching this on a television, please don't hesitate to pick up your phone and search for my channel, Sapphire Revenge. I truly hope to share these moments and feelings with you. Let's build a community together where we can share our truest emotions. Let's make this a place where we listen to each other, a place where no woman has to feel that her life, her struggles, and her triumphs are invisible. Thank you once again for sitting here with me. It means more than you know.